Welcome to the 1100 Charter of Liberty class by the Grumpy Old Vet. This is Lesson 2 of 28. This class will cover the first genealogical document that our founders used as a base for the founding documents that created the greatest government ever on the face of the earth. I will give the context of the history surrounding this document, and because it is in Old English, after each slide I will give commentary in plain English to make it easier to understand. With that, let's move out. Welcome to the 1100 Charter of Liberties class, brought to you by the Hillsdale Justice Project at Liberty Hall, narrated by John Rutan. All documents must be understood in the context of history. That being said, we will look at the history of the time and the major characters and their personalities, and how they came together to shape the 1100 Charter of Liberties, or also known as the Coronation Charter of King Henry. The Introduction of Common Law by King Edward. King Edward the Confessor, who ruled England from 1042 to 1066, played a critical role in shaping the legal foundations of the kingdom. While England already had a well-established system of customary laws, influenced by Anglo-Saxon traditions and Viking rule, Edward formalized and codified these legal practices into what would later be known as the common law. His reign saw the unification of these varying traditions, establishing a consistent legal framework that sought to balance the authority of the monarchy with established customs and local governance. His approach to law would leave a lasting impression, influencing later monarchs who sought to strengthen royal authority while maintaining the legal rights of their subjects. Edward was deeply religious and often sought counsel from the clergy, who played an essential role in drafting laws and influencing governance. He relied heavily on his royal court, known as the Witenagemot, a council composed of nobles, clergy, and advisors who aided in legal and administrative decisions. His reign saw the issuance of legal codes that formalized existing customs and provided a structured system for resolving disputes. The emphasis on judicial consistency laid the groundwork for the development of English common law, which would be expanded upon by subsequent monarchs. Harold Godwinson and the agreement with William, Duke of Normandy. Edward the Confessor's death in 1066 left a disputed claim to the English throne. Harold Godwinson, one of the most powerful nobles in England and a prominent member of the influential Godwin family, was crowned king. However, his claim was contested by two formidable rivals, William, Duke of Normandy, and Harald Hardrada, the Viking king of Norway. Years earlier, during a visit to Normandy, Harold had allegedly sworn an oath of fealty to William, promising to support his claim to the English throne. The circumstances surrounding this oath remain a matter of historical debate. Some sources suggest that Harold was coerced into swearing loyalty while in captivity, while others argue that he made the promise willingly in exchange for Norman support. Regardless of the truth, William used this oath as justification for his invasion of England, arguing that Harold had betrayed a sacred pledge. The dispute set the stage for one of the most significant military confrontations in English history. The Viking claim to the English throne and the battle in the north, Harald Hardrada's claim to the English throne, stemmed from earlier Viking rule in England. The Danish king Cnut had ruled England from 1016 to 1035, and Hardrada saw himself as the rightful heir to this legacy. With the support of Tostig Godwinson, Harold's estranged brother, Hardrada launched an invasion in the north of England. In September 1066, Hardrada's forces landed in Northumbria, where they quickly overran local resistance. They secured a decisive victory at the Battle of Fulford, forcing the northern earls to submit. However, Harold Godwinson responded with remarkable speed, marching his army northward in an exhausting forced march. On September 25, 1066, Harold's army engaged the Viking invaders at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The battle was fiercely contested, but Harold's forces ultimately triumphed. Hardrada and Tostig were both killed, and the remnants of the Viking army fled. The victory marked the end of Viking attempts to seize the English throne, but it left Harold's army weakened and unprepared for the challenges ahead. The march south and the Battle of Hastings. No sooner had Harold defeated the Viking invaders than he received news of William's landing in the south of England. The Norman fleet had crossed the Channel and landed at Pevensey on September 28, 1066. William's forces began pillaging the surrounding countryside, forcing Harold to march his weary army south at great speed. On October 14, 1066, the two armies met near Hastings. Harold's forces, composed largely of housecarls and the fired local militias, formed a defensive shield wall on Senlac Hill. The battle was fierce and lasted all day. The English initially repelled repeated Norman cavalry charges, but William's forces used tactical feints to lure sections of Harold's army into breaking formation. Eventually, Harold was killed. Legend holds that he was struck in the eye by an arrow, leaving England leaderless. With their king dead, the English forces began to retreat, and William emerged victorious. The coronation of William and the massacre of the people. Following his victory at Hastings, William moved swiftly to secure his claim to the throne. He faced resistance from English nobles, but he methodically crushed opposition. On Christmas Day in 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The coronation ceremony was attended by a mix of Norman and Anglo-Saxon nobles, as well as commoners who had gathered to witness the event. However, when the crowd cheered in celebration, William, unfamiliar with Anglo-Saxon customs, mistook the noise for the beginning of a rebellion. His Norman guards reacted violently, storming through the streets and slaughtering the assembled crowd. This misunderstanding highlighted the vast cultural differences between the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons, setting the stage for years of tension and rebellion. William's evil reign. William, Duke of Normandy, later known as William the Conqueror, imposed harsh and oppressive rule over England after his victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. One of his most significant and tyrannical changes was the complete overhaul of the English legal system. He removed native Anglo-Saxon judges and replaced them with foreign Norman magistrates who spoke only French and had no connection to the English people. This forced all legal proceedings to be conducted in French, effectively barring common Englishmen from participating in their own justice system. The native Anglo-Saxon nobles, many of whom had deep ties to the land and a long history of governance, were stripped of their authority, making them powerless in their own courts. This language barrier not only excluded the English from legal matters, but also reinforced their subjugation, as they could neither understand nor influence the very laws that governed them. William's tyranny extended beyond the courtroom. He confiscated vast amounts of English land, seizing it from the native nobility and redistributing it to his Norman followers. Those who had once ruled England as earls and thanes were either executed, exiled, or reduced to peasants working land they had once owned. William's supporters, many of whom had never set foot in England before, were rewarded with these stolen lands, creating a new ruling class loyal only to the foreign king. To further tighten his grip, he commissioned the Domesday Book in 1086, a meticulous survey designed to document every acre of land, every resource, and every inhabitant for taxation and control. This was not an administrative convenience, but a means to extract wealth and ensure that no Englishman could escape his iron rule. Those who resisted William's theft and oppression, such as the rebels in the north of England, were met with brutal repression. His infamous harrying of the north saw entire villages burned, thousands of men, women, and children slaughtered, and vast regions reduced to barren wastelands. Famine followed in the wake of his destruction, ensuring that survivors suffered slow and agonizing deaths. Through foreign judges, the erasure of English language and law, the theft of land, and sheer brutality, William ruled not as a just king, but as a ruthless conqueror who crushed the English beneath his boot. England's complex system of government. Despite the Norman conquest, England retained one of the most intricate and well-developed systems of governance in Europe. Unlike the feudal systems of the continent, which were often decentralized, England had a robust administrative framework, including the shire and hundred courts, a system of writs, and an early form of taxation. The Normans capitalized on this structure, using it to exert greater control while maintaining some degree of continuity. One of William's most significant administrative reforms was the commissioning of the Domesday Book in 1086. This comprehensive survey catalogued landholdings, resources, and population across England, allowing the monarchy to efficiently tax its subjects. Additionally, William introduced Norman feudal customs while preserving many Anglo-Saxon legal traditions, creating a unique fusion that shaped English governance for centuries. Henry I and the struggle with his brothers. Upon the death of William the Conqueror. In 1087, his three sons inherited different parts of his realm. The eldest, Robert Curthose, was given the Duchy of Normandy. The second son, William Rufus, inherited the throne of England. Henry, the youngest, was left with a financial inheritance but no land. Dissatisfied with this arrangement, Henry sought to expand his power. Conflict among the brothers was inevitable. William Rufus faced constant opposition from nobles who favored Robert, while Henry maneuvered politically to strengthen his position. Robert, more interested in the Crusades than in fighting over territory, departed for the Holy Land, leaving Henry to scheme his way into greater authority. The death of William Rufus and the two hunting parties. The unexpected death of William Rufus in 1100 proved to be a pivotal moment. The king was killed under mysterious circumstances during a hunting expedition in the New Forest, struck by an arrow that some believe was deliberately fired. Among the hunters was Henry, who wasted no time in seizing the throne before Robert could return from the Crusades. Shortly after becoming king, Henry issued the 1100 Charter of Liberties, a document that limited royal authority and protected baronial rights. This charter would serve as a precursor to the Magna Carta and would shape the future of the English monarchy and legal tradition. Henry's reign marked a critical turning point in the evolution of English governance, blending Norman efficiency with Anglo-Saxon legal traditions to create a lasting system of law and administration. Edward the Confessor, 1003, the 5th of January 1066, was one of the last Anglo-Saxon English kings. Usually considered the last king of the House of Wessex, he ruled from 1042 to 1066. Edward was the son of Ethelred the Unready and Emma of Normandy. He succeeded Canute the Great's son and his own half-brother Harthacnut. He restored the rule of the House of Wessex after the period of Danish rule, since Canute conquered England in 1016. When Edward died in 1066, he was succeeded by his wife's brother Harold Godwinson, who was defeated and killed in the same year by the Normans under William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings. Edward's young great-nephew Edgar the Atheling of the House of Wessex was proclaimed king after the Battle of Hastings in 1066, but was never crowned and was peacefully deposed after about 8 weeks. Edward the Confessor brought about the common law, and during this period did involve local assemblies like the hundred courts and shire courts, where local governance matters were addressed, and grievances could potentially be aired. It was during this time that the seed was planted, that although the king had the divine right to rule, the people had a divine right to liberty. We will see during this series of genealogical documents how that seed grows into the founding principles of the United States. Harold Godwinson, 1022, the 14th of October, 1066, also called Harold II, was the last crowned Anglo-Saxon English king. Harold reigned from the 6th of January, 1066, until his death at the Battle of Hastings, fighting the Norman invaders led by William the Conqueror during the Norman conquest of England. His death marked the end of Anglo-Saxon rule over England. Harold Godwinson was a member of a prominent Anglo-Saxon family with ties to Canute the Great. He became a powerful earl after the death of his father, Godwin, Earl of Wessex. After his brother-in-law, King Edward the Confessor, died without an heir on the 5th of January, 1066. The Witenagemot convened and chose Harold to succeed him. Harold Sigurdsson, 1015 the 25th of September 1066, also known as Harold III of Norway, and given the epithet Hardreda, roughly translated as stern counsel or hard ruler, was king of Norway from 1046 to 1066. Additionally, he unsuccessfully claimed both the Danish throne until 1064 and the English throne in 1066. Before becoming king, Harold had spent around 15 years in exile as a mercenary and military commander in Kiev and Rus and as a chief of the Varangian Guard in the Byzantine Empire. Harold invaded northern England with 10,000 troops and 300 longships in September 1066, raided the coast, and defeated English regional forces of Northumbria and Mercia in the Battle of Fulford near York on the 20th of September 1066. Harold was defeated and killed in a surprise attack by Harold Godwinson's forces in the Battle of Stamford Bridge. William the Conqueror was the illegitimate son of Duke Robert I of Normandy, 1028 to 1035. Hence, he is sometimes referred to as William the Bastard. William's mother was Herleve of Falaise, daughter of a wealthy merchant. Also known as William, Duke of Normandy, he led the Norman conquest of England on October 14, 1066, when he defeated and killed his rival Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. Crowned King William I of England on Christmas Day 1066, he secured his new realm after 5 years of hard battles against rebels and invaders. Count Richard I of Normandy was Edward's grandfather and William's great-grandfather. William had 3 sons, Robert Curthose, William Rufus, and Henry I. Robert II of Normandy, 1051 to the 3rd of February 1134, was the eldest son of William the Conqueror and succeeded his father as Duke of Normandy in 1087, reigning until 1106. William II, known as William Rufus, 1060 to 1100. Strong, outspoken, and ruddy, hence his nickname Rufus, William II reigned from 1087 to 1100. Henry I, 1068 to the 1st of December 1135, was King of England from 1100 till his death in 1135. He was the 3rd son of William the Conqueror. Charter of Liberties of King Henry I, also known as the Coronation Charter, AD 1100. With this charter, granted by Henry when he ascended the throne, the king formally bound himself to the laws, setting the stage for the rule of law and constitutionalism. The Charter of Liberties inspired those who compelled King John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215 and served as the model for that great document. Henry, King of the English, to Bishop Sampson and Urso de Abateau and all his barons and faithful, both French and English, of Worcestershire, greeting. 1. Know that by the mercy of God and the common counsel of the barons of the whole kingdom of England, I have been crowned king of said kingdom, and because the kingdom had been oppressed by unjust exactions, I, through fear of God and the love which I have toward you all, in the first place, make the holy church of God free, so that I will neither sell nor put to farm, nor on the death of archbishop or bishop or abbot will I take anything from the church's domain, or from its men, until the successor shall enter it. And I take away all the bad customs by which the kingdom of England was unjustly oppressed, which bad customs I here set down in part. Henry, acknowledging that his kingdom had been oppressed by unfair practices under his father and brother, declared his intention to govern justly. Out of fear of God and love for his subjects, he vowed to make the church free, promising not to exploit church property or impose taxes on it during vacancies in leadership. He also pledged to abolish harmful customs and unjust practices that had caused suffering across the kingdom. How did Henry know something was evil or oppressive? Henry identified what was evil or bad through 3 key lenses. 1. Moral and religious values. He expressed a fear of God implying that his understanding of justice and injustice was grounded in Christian teachings. Exploiting the church or the people was considered sinful and contrary to divine will. 2. Common Council of Barons. By consulting with the barons, Henry recognized their grievances and the abuses they and their people faced under his father and brother. Their input helped him identify specific bad customs that needed reform. 3. Pragmatism and public sentiment. Henry likely recognized that the unjust policies of his father and brother, such as heavy taxation, exploitation of church lands, and arbitrary rule, had led to widespread dissatisfaction. Addressing these issues would secure his legitimacy as king and ensure loyalty from his subjects. Henry's commitment to abolishing bad customs suggests he sought to distinguish his reign from the tyranny of his father and brother, framing himself as a just and godly ruler. This understanding of evil, rooted in both moral principles and practical governance, helped him establish reforms to correct injustices. History suggests that he only did this to hide what he had done to his brother, and also to gain the favor of the Council of Barons and Earls, as this was required. England had the most advanced and complex system of government to this time in history. 2. If any of my barons, earls, or others who hold of me shall have died, his heir shall not buy back his land as he used to do in the time of my brother, but he shall relieve it by a just and lawful relief. Likewise also the men of my barons shall relieve their lands from their lords by a just and lawful relief. If a noble, like a baron or earl, who owns land dies, his heir doesn't have to pay an unfair fee to get the land back, like they had to under the previous king. Instead, they will only have to pay a fair and reasonable amount. The same rule applies to the people who hold land from those nobles. They too should only have to pay a fair and lawful fee to inherit their land. 3. And if any of my barons or other men should wish to give his daughter, sister, niece, or kinswoman in marriage, let him speak with me about it. But I will neither take anything from him for this permission, nor prevent his giving her, unless he should be minded to join her to my enemy. And if, upon the death of a baron or other of my men, a daughter is left as heir, I will give her with her land by the advice of my barons. And if on the death of her husband the wife is left and without children, she shall have her dowry and right of marriage, and I will not give her to a husband unless according to her will. If one of the king's nobles or subjects wants to arrange a marriage for his female relative, like a daughter, sister, niece, or another family member, he must inform the king. However, the king won't charge a fee for permission or block the marriage, unless the match is with one of the king's enemies. If a noble dies and his heir is a daughter, the king will decide whom she marries, but only with the advice of his other nobles. If a widow is left without children after her husband dies, she will keep her dowry and have the right to remarry. The king won't force her into another marriage against her will. 4. But if a wife be left with children, she shall indeed have her dowry and right of marriage so long as she shall keep her body lawfully, and I will not give her unless according to her will. And the guardian of the land and children shall be either the wife or another of the relatives, who more justly ought to be. And I command that my barons restrain themselves similarly in dealing with the sons and daughters or wives of their men. If a widow has children, she will keep her dowry and have the right to remarry as long as she remains faithful and honorable. The king won't force her to marry anyone against her will. The person in charge of the land and children should be either the widow or another close relative who has the best claim to guardianship. The king also orders his nobles to follow the same rules when dealing with the families of their own vassals, meaning they shouldn't take advantage of widows or heirs. 5. The common seigniorage, which has been taken through the cities and counties, but which was not taken in the time of King Edward I, absolutely forbid henceforth. If anyone, whether a moneyer or other, be taken with false money, let due justice be done for it. The king is banning a tax called common seigniorage, which had been collected in cities and counties, but wasn't used during King Edward's time. From now on, it is no longer allowed. If anyone, whether a coin maker or someone else, is caught making or using fake money, they will face proper punishment. 6. I remit all pleas and all debts which were owing to my brother, except my lawful fixed revenues, and except those amounts which had been agreed upon for the inheritances of others, or for things which more justly concerned others. And if anyone had pledged anything for his own inheritance, I remit it. Also all reliefs which had been agreed upon for just inheritances. The king is canceling all legal disputes and debts that were owed to his late brother, except for his rightful revenues and any payments that were promised for inheritances or other rightful claims. If someone had pledged something to secure their inheritance, that debt is forgiven. The same goes for any payments, reliefs, that were agreed upon for legitimate inheritances. 7. And if any of my barons or men shall grow feeble, as he shall give or arrange to give his money, I grant that it be so given. But if prevented by arms or sickness, he shall not have given or arranged to give his money, his wife, children, relatives, or lawful men shall distribute it for the good of his soul, as shall seem best to them. If one of the king's barons or men becomes weak or ill and decides how to distribute his money, the king will honor his wishes. If he dies suddenly due to war or illness without making arrangements, his wife, children, relatives, or trusted associates will decide how to distribute his wealth in a way that benefits his soul, such as charity or religious offerings. 8. If any of my barons or men commit a crime, he shall not bind himself to a payment at the king's mercy, as he has been doing in the time of my father or my brother, but he shall make amends according to the extent of the crime, as he would have done before the time of my father, in the time of my other predecessors. But if he be convicted of treachery or heinous crime, he shall make amends, as is just. If one of the king's barons or men commits a crime, he won't have to pay an arbitrary fine set by the king, as was the practice under the previous two rulers. Instead, he will be punished fairly, based on the severity of the crime, following the older laws from before the king's father's rule. However, if he is found guilty of treason or a serious crime, he will face appropriate and just punishment. 9. I forgive all murders committed before the day I was crowned king, and those which shall be committed in the future shall be justly compensated, according to the law of King Edward. The king is pardoning all murders that happened before the day he was crowned. For any murders that happen in the future, the punishment or compensation will follow the laws that were in place under King Edward. 10. By the common consent of my barons, I have kept in my hands forests as my father had them. With the agreement of his barons, the king is keeping control of the royal forests, just as his father did. 11. To those knights who render military service for their lands, I grant of my own gift, that the lands of their domain ploughs be free from all payments and all labor, so that having been released from so great a burden, they may equip themselves well with horses and arms and be fully prepared for my service in the defense of my kingdom. The king is granting a special privilege to knights who serve in his military. Their farmland, used for their own plowing, will be free from taxes and labor obligations. This will ease their burden so they can focus on preparing for battle, ensuring they have the necessary horses and weapons to serve the king and defend the kingdom. 12. I impose a strict peace upon my whole kingdom and command that it be maintained henceforth. The king is declaring a strict peace across the entire kingdom and ordering that it be kept from now on. 13. I restore to you the law of King Edward with those amendments introduced into it by my father with the advice of his barons. The king is bringing back the laws of King Edward, along with the changes his father made to them, which were made with the advice of his barons. 14. If anyone, since the death of King William my brother, has taken anything belonging to me or to anyone else, the whole is to be quickly restored without fine. But if anyone keep anything of it, he upon whom it shall be found shall pay me a heavy fine. If anyone has taken something that belongs to the king or someone else since the death of King William, the king's brother, it must be returned immediately without any penalty. However, if someone keeps what they took, they will have to pay a large fine when it is found. Witnesses Morris Bishop of London and William Bishop elect of Winchester, and Gerard Bishop of Hereford, and Earl Henry, and Earl Simon, and Walter Gifford, and Robert de Montfort, and Roger Bigot, and Udo the Steward, and Robert son of Hamo, and Robert Mallet, at London when I was crowned. Farewell. The 1100 Charter of Liberties was groundbreaking as it created a process of governance, and it laid the foundation for limiting royal authority and protecting the rights of the Church and barons, influencing later documents like the Magna Carta. Many principles from this charter can be juxtaposed with those enshrined in the U.S. founding documents, particularly the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Key parallels include the relationship between government authority and individual rights. Principles from the Charter and their parallels in U.S. founding documents. 1. Protection of the Church from state interference. Paragraph 1 and the First Amendment. In the first paragraph of the Charter, Henry vowed to make the Church free, promising not to exploit its lands or interfere during leadership vacancies. This echoes the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits Congress from making laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Both documents recognize the importance of maintaining boundaries between religious institutions and governmental control to ensure freedom of religion. 2. Just and fair taxation. Paragraphs 3, 6, and no taxation without representation. Henry limited unjust inheritance fees and abolished oppressive land taxes, addressing grievances about financial exploitation by the Crown. Similarly, the American colonists' demand for no taxation without representation became a core principle of the U.S. Constitution, leading to fair taxation processes outlined in Article 1, Section 8. 3. Protection of property rights. Paragraphs 3, 5, 8, and the Fifth Amendment. The Charter guaranteed heirs fair inheritance and protected widows from losing their property through forced remarriage or extortion. Similarly, the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution ensures that private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation, emphasizing the protection of individual property rights from government overreach. 4. Due process and fair treatment. Paragraphs 8, 9, and the Fifth and 14th Amendments. Henry restricted arbitrary seizures of debtors' estates and required barons to treat their tenants fairly. This aligns with the due process clauses in the Fifth and 14th Amendments, which safeguard individuals from arbitrary deprivation of life, liberty, or property without lawful procedures. 5. Accountability of leadership. Paragraphs 13 and checks and balances. Henry pledged to rectify injustices and ensure fairness in governance. Similarly, the U.S. Constitution establishes a system of checks and balances to prevent abuses of power by any single branch of government, ensuring accountability to the people. 6. Restoration of traditional rights and rule of law. Paragraphs 12 and the Declaration of Independence. Henry reaffirmed the customary laws of King Edward the Confessor to restore a sense of justice and continuity. The Declaration of Independence similarly demands the restoration of inherent rights violated by the British Crown, emphasizing the importance of rule of law and natural rights. Conclusion. The 1100 Charter of Liberties and the U.S. founding documents both reflect a commitment to restraining centralized power, protecting individual rights, and ensuring fairness and justice. Henry's vow that the king, the state, must not interfere with the Church laid an early foundation for the principle of religious freedom, later codified in the First Amendment. Similarly, his efforts to address oppressive taxes and guarantee fair treatment of subjects foreshadowed the broader protections for liberty and justice enshrined in America's founding principles. Both texts underscore the timeless struggle for balance between authority and liberty. That concludes the second lesson in this series on the 1100 Charter of Liberty. I hope you found the information entertaining and interesting. I will see you in Class 3, where we will go over the Magna Carta of 1215 in depth. Fall out.